In the last lecture module, we examined claims in the functionalist literature about the ontological neutrality of functionalism and about multiple realizability. In this module, I want to turn our attention to one more claim. The claim that we find on page 177 in Block that's made by many functionalists, namely some philosophers, functional specifiers, take functionalism showing that physicalism is probably true, while others, functional state identifiers, take functionalism showing that physicalism is probably false. So functionalism shows physicalism is probably false. That's the claim I want to look at a little more carefully. I think that this statement is at least misleading. It's probably just out and out wrong or mistaken. The claim depends on a particular, and I would have to say implausible, understanding of physicalism and what it would mean for physicalism to be true. And so by exploring it, I think we can see that it illustrates why it is naive to equate physicalism with type-type reductive physicalism as understood to the unity of science. So the idea here is that in order for physicalism to be true, every higher level science, all the terms in those sciences must reduce in a type-by-type reductive fashion to the terms in a lower science. And if there is a multiply realized term, that is a term that can be realized in the form of multiple different physical types in the lower level science, then that shows physicalism is wrong. So in the case of functionalism about mental states, if it turns out that belief or desire or pain or ennui could be realized in one system in one particular way that is mapped onto one physical type, and in another system it gets mapped onto a different physical type, then that shows that physicalism is false. But consider whether or not that sounds even remotely plausible. Let's take the case of the term force. Now, surely the notion of a force is central to physics, the most basic of the sciences. However, there are 5 different fundamental forces. That means that there are 5 realizations of the term force. If we don't even have a single realization of the central concept of the fundamental science, is it really plausible to suppose that we need these single type-to-type reductions from one scientific theory to the next? Does it really mean that physicalism is false because there are 5 different kinds of forces? I don't think so. Now you might think, oh, that's just some sort of weird Wallace example, but I don't think it is. I mean, consider the notion of a pendulum, just a pendulum. We can make a pendulum with a string and a bob. We can make a pendulum with a rigid arm and a bob. We can make a pendulum with a central fulcrum so that it's a rigid pole that is oscillating on top of a central fulcrum with one part of the pendulum on either side. We can do all sorts of different particular instantiations of the concept of a pendulum. Consider temperature. In a gas, temperature is the mean kinetic energy of the gas molecules in a volume. In a solid, temperature is the translational kinetic energy of the molecules within their molecular bonds. In thermodynamics, temperature is those things, but also radiant energy, electromagnetic radiation. So, for instance, uranium is hotter than its physical temperature because it's emitting electromagnetic radiation. So it seems like there are lots and lots of examples of multiply realized concepts, and that doesn't seem to be any problem at all for physicalism. Well, how then do scientists deal with functionally characterized multiply realized concepts in regular sciences? Say biology. Well, let's take an example. Suppose we want to study the evolution of the eye. Well, to do that, we need to discuss what it is to be an eye in a way that allows for a certain amount of variability in how it gets instantiated. So we might characterize an eye as a structure in an organism that exhibits photosensitivity and that the organism exploits in order to sense the distal environment and to respond adaptively, especially through locomotion. For instance, one finds the earliest and most primitive proto-eye in a single-cell flagellate whose name I can never pronounce because I'm dyslexic, called Ulgina. Now, these Ulgina possess an organelle composed of a carotenoid pigment. Like in carrots, except that this one's red. So those pigment granules are in a little structure within the cell. It's called the eye spot. The eye spot then filters sunlight, and that filtered sunlight then falls on the light-detecting photoreceptor component of this organism. So when light falls on this photosensitive component, which is a flavoprotein that reacts to light, then the flavoprotein reacts to light. It's a photoreceptor. It's at the base of the flagellum, the little tail-like protrusion from the end of it. And so when that flavoprotein reacts to light, it causes the flagellum to move around, and the Ulgina uses the flagellum then for phototaxis, that is, light-oriented movement. And this allows the Ulgina to increase its photosynthesis, to adapt to its environment through sensitivity, specifically photosensitivity, and ambulation. Now, I would suggest that it's precisely because we've done a little, almost armchair functional analysis here, where we've taken components of the Ulgina, understood how they were operating in relationship to light, and then used that integration of their operations to show how they, in fact, fulfilled this function of using light sensitivity to guide the Ulgina towards light, to ambulate towards light. Those physical components of that explanation are precisely why we can understand the functional component, and precisely why our understanding of the functional component doesn't undermine our ability to see this thing as a physical thing and that it's consistent with physicalism. We can likewise tell similar stories, I would suggest, for every single stage in the evolution of particular kinds of eyes. And a similar story can be told, I would say, for every eye that we see out there in the real animal world, whether it's jellyfish eye spots or starfish eyes or leaf-tailed gecko eyes or robert fly eyes or so on. The diverse instantiations don't undermine physicalism precisely because our ability to understand these things as eyes depends upon our understanding them as physical.